have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed.
I don't envision power, nor peace, only to serve my country.
And right into the side of the Twin Tower, exploding through the other side.
Premier Khrushchev has sent a message to President Kennedy today.
December 7th, 1941. The New World Order.
I'm prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over, if that's your decision.
Over the years, even the most naive American has had a suspicion that there must be a reason why, most of the time, our government helps our enemies and betrays our friends. Just a handful of scholars have seriously studied the subject. The ones who have done it have concluded that the U.S. government has been hijacked by a group of rich, powerful individuals who have been using it to advance their own private interests. This group has been called different names: the power elite, the insiders, the secret team, the shadow government, the usurpers, the invisible government.
It should become evident for anybody with eyes to see that the United States, under the control of the conspirators, is rapidly turning into a totalitarian society. Currently, in the United States of America, a country that for many years was a beacon of liberty for the world, the authorities can legally spy, search, apprehend, and incarcerate any American citizen indefinitely, without the right of habeas corpus, legal representation, or a trial by jury. Also, as in a totalitarian country, elections in the United States are always rigged.
But it seems that finally, Americans are waking up from their media-induced dream. A growing percentage of the American people, both true conservatives and true liberals, among them several relatives of the victims of the destruction of the World Trade Center, are convinced that the 9/11 events were a self-inflicted provocation, similar to the burning of the Reichstag by the Nazis, carried out by our secret government in complicity with the Democratic Party and the media, as a pretext for the implementation of a totalitarian dictatorship in this country.
At the time we recorded this program, opinion polls indicated that 61% of Americans believed that their own government is directly responsible for the September 11th events. Currently, the number of books that point to the U.S. government as directly responsible for the 9/11 events is growing, and they are selling fast.
Most of the authors of these books blame the Bush administration for this tragedy, instead of the conspirators who control the government behind the scenes. But the 9/11 events are not the only ones that claim for an answer.
For example, how is it possible that the CIA, which has shown a great ability in assassinating leaders all around the world, proved to be so inept in its alleged attempts at assassinating Fidel Castro? Why did the CIA and the FBI persecute, harass, and jail anti-Castro Cubans who were planning to kill Castro? Why did the CIA fuse all anti-Castro organizations in the United States into one, and then destroy it after the debacle at the Bay of Pigs? Why in the months previous to the invasion did the CIA stop sending arms and supplies to the anti-Castro guerrillas in the Escambray Mountains? Why did the U.S. government leave the Bay of Pigs invaders in the lurch and fail to provide the air support promised to the invaders, sending them to a sure death? How was it possible that the country with the most sophisticated technical means of espionage failed to detect that Castro was sending troops to Africa, and only found out when he had more than 20,000 soldiers deployed in Angola? Did the U.S. spy satellites fail to detect that the Angolan ports were crowded with Cuban ships? Why did Castro's troops protect the Shell refineries in Cabinda? And why did Shell pay Castro in dollars for this service? How can one explain that after almost 50 years of Castro's allegedly anti-American activity in Latin America, far from damaging the interest of American transnational corporations and Wall Street bankers, he has benefited them? Why did United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan declare that Cuba is an example from which we can learn? What are the secret reasons behind powerful people like David Rockefeller, Maurice Strong, Peter Peterson, and James Wolfenson, all of them senior CFR members, for publicly saying that Castro's Cuba is a model to follow? How can we explain the love between the most reactionary institution in the Western Hemisphere and the alleged most revolutionary leader of the continent? Why was Castro the main force behind the destruction of the traditional pro-Soviet communist parties in Latin America? Why did he make such a great effort in destabilizing and overthrowing democratically elected leaders all around the world? How can one explain the fact that because of the fly of capital from Latin America, for fear of Castro-backed guerrilla activities, the American military-industrial complex and Wall Street bankers engrossed their fortunes? Castro paints himself as an enemy of economic liberalism and globalization. How can we explain, then, his close friendship with Mexican ex-president Carlos Salinas de Gortari, whom senior CFR executives consider the highest promoter of economic liberalism and globalization in Mexico? Why Castro left Guevara in the lurch in Bolivia and thus allowed the CIA to eliminate him? Why Castro first destabilized the Allende government in Chile and later contributed to its overthrowing? If recently surfaced information is true, Allende did not commit suicide. His Cuban security chief, General Patricio de la Guardia, killed him, following direct orders from Castro. Why, based on false information, President George W. Bush sent American troops to the other side of the planet to overthrow a dictator that was no threat to the U.S., but did not send them to overthrow a tyrant 90 miles from America's shores, notwithstanding the fact that this tyrant has threatened and committed terrorist acts against this country, and there is evidence that he has bacteriological weapons of mass destruction. The largest stockholders and true owners of Exxon, originally Standard Oil Company, are the Rockefellers. In Venezuela, Exxon does business through a subsidiary, the Creole Petroleum Company. But it is known that Creole is a CIA creation. Actually, in Venezuela, Creole means CIA. How can we explain that the Rockefellers, who on many occasions have used the CIA to protect their interests, have done nothing to protect their businesses from Chavez, and even sent their agent Carter to consolidate the Venezuelan leader in power?
All these questions, and many more that would make this list too long, are almost impossible to answer by a historian. To an intelligence analyst, however, they would be relatively easy to answer. Actually, the answers have always been in front of everybody's eyes. For example, the answer as to why the U.S. government, under the Wall Street oligarchs' control, has tolerated Castro all these years and now tolerates Chavez is because, far from being a threat to the Wall Street's oligarchs, both of them are secretly working to help the bankers carry on their plans of global dominance. On the contrary, what I have found is that one way or another, Castro always ends up by benefiting the interests of the corporations and the Wall Street bankers he claims to hate. The case of Angola is perhaps the most obvious example, but not the only one.
Most likely, it was here, at the Harold Pratt House, headquarters of the Council on Foreign Relations, where the initial plans for the CIA's first large-scale psychological warfare operation, now known as the Bogotazo, were laid down. A new agent they recruited in early 1948 played a cardinal role. This secret agent was sent to Bogota, Colombia, on a secret mission. Once there, acting as an agent provocateur, he coordinated the assassination of Colombian populist leader Jorge Eliezer Gaitan.
This new secret agent the conspirators had recruited was a young Cuban university student named Fidel Castro.
His first mission consisted in traveling to Bogota, Colombia, planting false evidence and creating false clues implicating the communists in the assassination of Gaitan and the Bogotazo riots. He was very successful. It was not a coincidence that U.S. Secretary of State George Marshall was in Bogota at the time, presiding over the 9th International Conference of Latin American States. Following the plan, the day after the tragic events, Marshall blamed the communists for the assassination of Gaitan and the riots. The Bogotazo PSYOP marked the beginning of the Cold War in the Western Hemisphere. It was effectively used by the CFR conspirators to plant the fear of communism in the minds of the American and Latin American people. The fear of communism became an excellent cover for the CFR conspirators to hide their true activities of exploitation and control. Since then, Fidel Castro has never stopped working for his CFR masters, initially through his CIA controllers and later directly with them. As a way of payment for his important services, Castro's CFR masters have allowed him to continue working unmolested in the systematic destruction of Cuba and its people. In the process, growing his numbered accounts in Zurich. One of the areas in which Castro had proved his worth had been his mastery in attracting fools, like Che Guevara, the Ortega brothers, Hugo Chavez, and more recently some Muslim leaders, and recruiting them under a false flag to fight Yankee imperialism. One of the techniques favored by intelligence services all around the world is the creation of their own controlled pseudo-opposition to create Hegelian-type managed artificial conflicts. And the CFR conspirators have made an art of it.
The mysterious explosion of the French freighter La Coubre in Havana Harbor, the Bay of Pigs invasion, the guerrilla wars in Latin America, the invasion of Angola, the death of Che Guevara, and the assassination of Presidents John F. Kennedy and Salvador Allende, the shoot-down by Castro's mix of 2 American civilian planes, just to mention a few, were CFR, CIA, Castro joint operations planned by the CFR conspirators. At some time, Orlando Bosch and Eden Pastora realized that the CIA-Castro mixture was very unhealthy, and that saved their lives. Francisco Camaño, Jorge Ricardo Massetti, Salvador Allende, Che Guevara, and many other gullible fools like them discovered it too late and paid dearly for their big mistake.
On February 24th, 1996, Castro's MiG shot down 2 unarmed American civilian planes over international waters, killing 4 Americans. The planes belonged to the Miami-based Brothers to the Rescue organization, an anti-Castro group providing help to rafters escaping from the island. A month before, Leslie Gelb, then president of the Council on Foreign Relations, had visited Havana and had private meetings with Fidel Castro.
Was this another CFR-CIA Castro joint operation? Some people have speculated that Gelb gave Castro the green light for shooting down the Brothers to the Rescue planes. Moreover, it seems that the terrorist act that destroyed a Cuban airliner in 1973, killing all passengers, including the Cuban Olympic fencing team, was also a CIA-Castro joint operation of self-provocation.
The main clue for this suspicion is that Beatriz Marquez, a Cuban singer in vogue at the time, was visiting Venezuela on a tour and was scheduled to fly back to Havana that night. But a few hours before, somebody important ordered her not to take that flight. At the time, Marquez was married to a senior officer in Castro's security detail, and that saved her life. The poor boys of the fencing team unknowingly played an important job. They provided Castro with martyrs for his revolution. In the same fashion, and despite the dense curtain of disinformation created by CFR secret agents, there are abundant clues pointing to the possibility that the assassination of President Kennedy had been also a CFR-CIA Castro joint operation. Moreover, everything seems to indicate that the flooding of the U.S. with drugs from South America has also been a joint CFR-CIA Castro operation, a sort of opium war planned by the CFR conspirators to destroy the moral fiber of the U.S. as a way to facilitate the establishing of a totalitarian regime in America.
Of course, as a key CFR secret agent, Castro also played his role on behalf of the Wall Street bankers and oil magnates in the fateful events of September 11, 2001. Currently, with the support of sub-agent Hugo Chavez, Castro is carrying out an important Hegelian-type psychological warfare operation against the people of Latin America on behalf of his CFR masters. The goal of this operation, similar to the Bogotazo but on a continental scale, is to scare the hell out of the ruling classes in Latin America with the fear of Castro Chavism. A large portion of the nationalist Latin American ruling class fear the growing economic penetration and political influence of Wall Street and American transnationals in their countries, and were reluctant to accept the new free trade agreements with the U.S. But the CFR conspirators used the fear of Castro Chavism as a strong factor to force them into accepting first the Central American Free Trade Agreement and later the Free Trade Area of the Americas as the lesser of two evils. The conspirators were right. The Castro-Chavez psyop is bringing the expected results.
The Central America Free Trade Agreement, CAFTA, and the Free Trade Area of the Americas, FTAA, are just previous steps toward the creation of the American Union, which would extend from Alaska to Patagonia. The American Union, under the total control of the Wall Street bankers and oil magnates through their international financial organizations, and if necessary with the help of U.S. Special Forces.
This is Truth Lies, and I am Servando Gonzalez.